heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
Live from New York and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology. It's election day and the tech policies and implications you need to know about on the last day of voting.
Plus, Palantir shares jump as it posts record profit amid unwavering AI demand.
And Apple Eye's smart glasses, we discuss the internal study codenamed Atlas as it follows Snap and Meta's lead. But first, we check in on these markets. As people head in person to the polls, we're currently up 0.9% on the Nasdaq. Big tech leading the charge today. Nvidia, Tesla on the higher side. And really, it is big tech that also drives from an earnings perspective. Ed, what are you watching on the micro?
Yes, straight to Palantir. Shares up 23% in the session, on track for their biggest jump since February of this year, trading at an all-time high. What's astonishing is, like, out of nowhere, this is a company with $114 billion market cap. And it's all on revenue in the quarter gone of little more than $700 million. But the narrative, incredibly clear, unwavering AI demand from corporate America and from the public sector as well. Let's get right to Palantir with Mandeep Singh of Bloomberg Intelligence. Where would you like to start, Mandeep? I mean, the story of Palantir is a long-term one. It's continued with this momentum for a while. What jumped out from its earnings print for you?
Yeah, I mean, the government segment growing 40% here in the U.S. and it is on the back of, some connection that they have found with implementing LLMs. I mean, everyone is looking at ways to deploy, whether it's GPT, Gemini, or Meta Llama. And to Palantir's credit, they found the right pivot when it comes to integrating the data, the ontology that they have with these LLMs. And I think that's why you're seeing that, especially strong momentum on the government side, but also defense tech companies on the commercial side. I think in the U.S. they've done particularly well because of their, data lineage and the fact that they have done so well over the years in terms of, ontology.
What's interesting, of course, your note that you put out is saying perhaps there was a rush to spend budget that was happening from the U.S. government perspective. From your mind's eye, therefore, Mandeep, have they diversified enough to ensure that they've got the private sector where they want it to be?
Yeah, I mean, look, we are in an environment of heightened geopolitical tensions, and that has traditionally benefited Palantir. I'm a little leery of, their momentum on the international side, given it's still 30% plus of their business, and that's where you see a tapering of growth, given how controversial the CEO can be at times. And look, when it comes to software companies, you want to show recurring revenue. That's why the cloud names have fetched, premium multiples over the year. Palantir currently trades at a premium multiple, so it comes down to can they sustain this momentum, and I think that's where international is key, which I'm not sure they can sustain that kind of momentum.
Technically, the shares are overbought. If you're looking at the relative strength index, Mandeep Singh of Bloomberg Intelligence brings us the fundamentals there. But look, let's get back to what the day is. It is election day. It is here in the US, and the polling continues to show that race as close as any in modern history. We bring it back to Kaylee Lyons, who joins us at the start of her marathon of a day. And Kaylee, just bring us up to speed with what we should be looking at right here, right now.
Well, really, this is going to come down to turnout. That probably will surprise no one. But with the margins this tight consistently in polling, it really is going to be about who can convince voters to get off the couch today and vote for them. No longer is it about convincing them to vote for either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, but instead to get them to vote at all. And I would keep in mind that millions of Americans have already done so. As of this morning, more than 83 million people had already cast their vote. And the electorate in total, those eligible to vote, is only 244 million. So it will be a question of how much of that electorate actually shows up today when they go to the polls. And of course, it is 7 states where the turnout is going to matter most. Those battlegrounds in the Rust Belt and in the Sun Belt are what the candidates have been zeroing in on. It's why Kamala Harris spent her entire day yesterday in Pennsylvania, which has 19 electoral votes. Donald Trump spending some time in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan as they race today to get to 270. And I would just warn our audiences, it may be the case that we will not know who gets 270 electoral votes. Not today, not tomorrow. It could potentially take days.
Kayleigh, thank you for your reporting. Just incredible command of the data, which is so important in this tight race. Both candidates kind of had closing pitches or remarks last night. Where do we leave things in both the Trump camp and the Harris camp?
Well, we heard similar things from Kamala Harris, which is that she wants to essentially turn the page on what she has referred to as a dark era in American politics, the past decade in which Donald Trump has been involved in presidential campaigns over what has now been 3 cycles. She reiterated she wants to chart a new way forward. For Donald Trump, he is basically trying to make himself the change candidate in this race, suggests that Kamala Harris, as part of this Biden administration, which in many ways has been unpopular, especially with its handling of the economy, shows that the country needs to move on. He described that the country cannot take 4 more years of what he referred to last night as gross incompetence. Now, they both are no longer in battleground states as we speak. Donald Trump should be voting anytime now in his home state of Florida. He is still allowed to do so, even though he was a convicted felon, convicted in New York. But New York law dictates a convicted felon can still vote. Therefore, Florida recognizes that he will be able to cast a vote for himself today. Kamala Harris, meantime, is at home in D.C. at the Naval Observatory, and she will be heading to Howard University, her alma mater, for her election night party this evening, because at this point, there's really nothing left either of them can do. The closing arguments have been made. The ground game has been working for months now, and we all just have to wait for the tally to come in.
Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons, thank you very much. Let's get the market's perspective and bring in Anna Ruffman of CBiz Investment Advisory Services. Equity markets are higher. Big tech or mega cap tech stocks are kind of leading the way. Voting is underway. What does that tell you, Anna, if anything?
I think the markets are ready for this election to be over and for some of the uncertainties that have been present in leading up to this day to be over. And I think there's a lot of excitement about that. But depending on who wins and depending on what Washington looks like, there are some issues that may be facing tech, and that's on the regulatory side. So if I'm taking a look at what might be lying ahead, I mean, of course, these things can change. There are 3, I would put them in 3 buckets. One is that things that are pretty known, that Washington is a consensus on. And that one thing is national security. And so for the semiconductor industry and AI development, I would really look at that and say there may be a challenge, especially when we're talking about importing and exporting things from China. Undoing some of that global supply chain is going to be a challenge there in creating less reliance on China. The other is antitrust issues. If we look at, and that's the unknown, right? So if we look at a potential Harris administration, we've seen Biden administration be not as friendly. Trump administration, I think there's assumption that they're going to be more friendly, especially with the Republican Party, but it's not always the case because we have a case while Trump was president between 2016 and 2020. Everybody remembers Time Warner and AT&T Enterprise, right?
Anna, just real quick, we're kind of zeroed in on this presidential race, but of course the composition of Congress will have an impact. And I think in particular about, if you're talking about regulation, artificial intelligence, but also electric vehicles, right? The standing impact of the IRA and any changes that might hit that. How do you model for that, please?
On the EV side?
Sure.
On the EV side, I think there's what we've established as what Congress would want, right? But so if you have a Democratic sweep, it's going to look one way. If you have a Republican sweep, it's going to look another way. But I think the American people have sort of spoken through sales. I mean, if we look at Tesla, for example, I mean, Tesla did really well, but in terms of volume sales, it was down, right? If you look at Ford and GM, their EV sales were down. So I don't know if Washington is going to continue to demand, depending on who, especially for the Democratic Party, continue to demand that kind of regulation. But the American people might just not be for it. So I'm not entirely sure if it's going to shake out the way we might project.
Tesla, of course, one of the leading points contributors to the NASDAQ on the day, at least, Anna. The leading is NVIDIA. And I just want to ask you a little bit more about the semiconductor industry and what you're trying to factor in terms of future policy there, whether it be with China or whether it be building here in the US.
Yeah, I think with AI, that's the national security bit that I was talking about before. I think the building here in the U.S. is going to take a very long time. So I think that we're not going to see that tomorrow or next year, or frankly, even in the next 4 years, whoever is the president and what Washington might look like. So I think with NVIDIA and AI, the chips and the import and export controls, that's going to be a big topic probably for the next 10, 15 years.
Have you been worried in any way about potential change of course when it comes to the subsidies, the support here in the US for the chip sector building in the US? Has that changed any of your investment assumptions?
It doesn't worry us. I mean, again, this is going to take a long time. It actually makes us excited because it actually takes the risk of relying too much on Taiwan and South Korea, and it brings it in here. But now that also then you have to question, is that going to increase the cost of production here? Because it is essentially a little more expensive to make things here. And that actually opens up the door to other discussions here that may not be tech related per se, but everyone who uses tech.
And indeed monetary policy related if we are indeed talking about inflationary pressure. Anna Rathman, so good to have you on this day, CBIZ Investment Advisory Services. Meanwhile, we want to keep an eye on other chip-related stocks today because the key contributor to the downside in terms of points on the Nasdaq 100 is NXP today. Why? Its earnings. And we saw overall that it was underwhelming, to say the least. We're falling the most since July. Issues with the car industry in particular. We saw the fourth quarter sales and earnings forecast disappointing because of that slowdown in automotive customers and indeed weak industrial demand too.
Okay, coming up on the show, details on the survival of Elon Musk's $1 million sweepstakes. That's next. This is Bloomberg Technology. A legal win for Elon Musk as a Pennsylvania judge rejected a request to halt his daily $1 million sweepstakes, which is run by Musk's pro-Donald Trump America PAC. Bloomberg's Chris Dolmetsch on the ground for us. And Chris, I think we've covered this over the course of a number of days or weeks. And at the heart of it was what is the legal issue here? But just bring us the latest of what the judge decided in the moment about this sweepstakes.
So yeah, hi. The judge had a 6-hour hearing with the DA of Philly, Larry Krasner, on the stand for a few hours, and the treasurer of the PAC. And almost immediately after rejected the DA's request for an immediate order that would have halted the PAC. He didn't explain his reasoning. He said he's going to put out an order, an opinion momentarily that will explain his reasoning. But the DA had contended that the giveaway violated state lottery laws and also consumer protection laws because it wasn't protecting the confidential personal information of the people who won the prize. The PAC had contended that it actually wasn't a lottery at all. It was actually these people were given employment contracts for their time as spokespersons for the PAC. And they kind of said they were being put through the ringer, so that's what they were being compensated for. And in fact, the treasurer of the PAC said on the stand that he was surprised to hear Elon call it a random giveaway because he said it wasn't. These people were being compensated for their time.
So that leaves us precisely where, Chris? Because I suppose there's more transparency on actually what this was all about and sort of paid spokespeople, but ultimately we're off the hook from a legal perspective.
For the most part. Now, the DA continued to pursue damages, and he made it clear that he was going to seek more money. I mean, this is an emergency injunction motion. So, and for the most part, like you said, it's kind of moot. The giveaway is over. They said they weren't going to give away any more money. So Elon last week tried to get this moved to federal court. This is why it took so long. The DA only filed this suit a week ago, and it was supposed to have a hearing on Thursday that got canceled when Elon tried to move it to federal court, and then it got punted back to state court. So for the most part, this lawsuit is kind of over for the moment, and Elon was kind of victorious, even though ostensibly, he lost his attempt to move it out of court.
Bloomberg's Chris Dormett on the latest. We thank you. Now, look, Silicon Valley heavyweights such as Elon Musk, they've made a significant impact on this year's US election. But our next guest says tech's involvement began long before the 2024 decision. Let's bring in Noor Laik, Technology and Geopolitics Fellow at the Harvard Belfer Center. You recently wrote an op-ed on this exact topic. Just take us back in history. This dates back to the 80s, really, the 90s, when technology CEOs really started to make their feelings and money known in politics.
Hi, Caroline. Yes, our current age of tech really began in the 1980s with the arrival of the desktop computer. And then in the 1990s, e-commerce took off. And now we're in sort of the third act of this age in terms of AI and, of course, the space race. But from the very start, from the 1980s, Silicon Valley's players, many of whom are still the same today as they were then, so people like starting with Steve Jobs and right through to Bezos and Musk, started becoming politically active in the 1980s and engaging with government in terms of the kind of changes they wanted in terms of regulation, investment, and also the idea of government as a customer.
I suppose what potentially has changed here is that one of them might well take a very leading role in an administration if indeed Trump does get in. I'm talking about Elon Musk. But moreover, we're getting more transparency about their roles. Is that because of the way they're self-identifying, or is that because of the age of social media? Are we able to find these things out?
I think it's because, we have people like Elon Musk being sort of particularly flamboyant in terms of their approach. I mean, with the $1 million lottery, where there's been so much focus on the $1 million. But actually, I think it's great to have that because we are now seeing the power of tech, which was sort of previously, I think, existed. I mean, the PayPal mafia kind of functioned as very much with the sort of oath of silence or omerta in terms of their political views, and we've seen those actually coming out now, and just how much people like Musk can influence narratives, and not just through money, but in terms of how they think about the economy, and of course how Musk has also been thinking about issues like immigration and voter fraud.
Now, in your research, have you found specific evidence that an endorsement from a technology leader like Musk or an appeal from leaders in technology to actually go out and vote translates to that action by the electorate and the voting base?
I think it does have some impact. The very first Silicon Valley election took place in 1992, when Clinton actually went out to woo Silicon Valley because he wanted the Democrats to be seen as a pro-business, pro-tech party. And the endorsement that Silicon Valley gave him just, I think, 3 weeks ahead of that election did actually help in terms of shifting the mood somewhat. But of course, at that point, he was already ahead in the polls. So I think it does help in some way in terms of boosting the candidates' credentials. And we've seen that happening this time with both Kamala Harris and Trump vying for Silicon Valley endorsements.
No, do you believe that technology is a priority for both campaigns in this election?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that when we have candidates competing for Silicon Valley votes and endorsements, it means that actually it's a win-win for Silicon Valley, irrespective of whether it's Trump or Kamala Harris who ends up in the White House.
I think just broadly, we need to just think about ultimately whether the electorate, do you think, has that transparency, that knowledge that with endorsements, with hitting the campaign trail, there might well be positives for the companies that they run in the later half of the administration?
I think all of us are becoming much more aware of the power of big tech. I mean, we've now been living in the age of tech for the last 40 years. So I think, yes, the electorate is beginning to pay more attention. And when we have people like Musk making the kind of statements they do, in a way, he's helped add to the need for more transparency and has made the process more transparent, in fact, inadvertently.
Neil Like, Technology and Geopolitics Research Fellow at the Belfer Center of the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Let's get a quick check on these markets. We, of course, see people lining up, willing and wanting to be able to cast their votes today at the election polls. I'm looking at the Nasdaq 100 up more than 1%. In fact, we're seeing big tech leading the charge. Bitcoin on the higher side as well. So we're seeing that as some sort of proxy, as many feel, for potentially a Trump administration coming in, and one that has shown significant support of cryptocurrencies here in the United States. But I'm looking at an ecosystem that is led higher on the tech side, also by earnings, fundamentals. Palantir still showing that the AI demand is resilient and in many ways unabound. We're up more than 22% after the numbers are a beat and raise for Palantir, particularly strong growth here in the United States. Supermicrocomputer, look, we get some numbers after the bell today, but for many it's not going to be about the numbers that they show, and in fact we are expecting more than 200% increase in their sales for this particular fiscal quarter. But people want to know what on earth is going on with the DOJ investigation, what on earth happened in terms of them losing their accounting, and what on earth about overall the focus on these businesses and transparency around Supermicro. I'm looking at Trump Media, though, DJT up 15%. 7 out of the last 8 trading days, Ed, we've seen double-digit moves, quadruple the volatility that we see for Bitcoin. This, again, a proxy on Trump and a win. Ed.
Okay, a story that broke late last night. Predictions betting platform Polymarket has been paying US-based influencers to promote election betting on the site, even though it's barred from letting anyone in the country use the tool to place wagers, including on today's presidential race. Bloomberg's Margie Murphy broke the story and joins us now. What did you learn?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people may have seen Polymarket across their social media. There's just been a flurry of memes and graphics showing Kamala versus Trump with a landslide to Trump. And so we'd heard that Polymarket had been reaching out to US-based social media influencers saying, look, we'll pay for, we want to sponsor any of your political content. And that happened in September. And since then, that's when we've seen this kind of rise of Polymarket partners. And we learned that basically, even though Polymarket isn't supposed to be targeting a US audience, they're really going for, they want the eyeballs from the US, and they've been basically picking up with any social media influencer who's based in the US, not raising any concerns about the fact that their audience is US based, and saying kind of just go for it, please, like flood your audience with adverts for our market, and really encouraging people to get on and trade, even though technically they're not supposed to be doing that.
Let's talk about whether or not it is indeed trades they want, or whether or not Polymarket predictions betting platform also brings data for many. Is their counter-argument that they just want eyeballs, people to come to the service, even if in the US you're barred from making any particular bet?
Right. So the argument is, the Polymarket spokesperson said to us, 99% of people are just coming to the website to view it as a news source for them, and only 1% actually place trades. And that's interesting because the way that it's been shown on social media, the way that influencers explain to us how they were asked to present themselves is very much like polling data. Mm-hmm. So when you look at these social media posts, it looks like you're viewing poll data. So if this 1% who are based outside the US are the ones who are actually making these trades and creating this data, that means you're seeing kind of predictions from people who are outside the US, except it looks like a poll. And polling data is not supposed to have information from anyone outside of the US. So it's a little bit manipulative for people who may not understand that it's predictions betting, because it really does look like poll data.
Meanwhile, the ads asked viewers whether they were voting on Trump or Harris and telling them, don't trust the polls, trust the markets. A fascinating story. Go read it. Margie Murphy, we thank you on all things Polymarkets. Meanwhile, in a presidential campaign marked by what seems amplified divisive rhetoric and rumours, Many are working to combat misinformation, separate fact from fiction. Danielle Lee Thompson is with the Center for an Informed Public, which focuses on translating research about misinformation into policy. You join us now. And Danielle, there is a feeling of amplified divisiveness, but is that feeling a reality?
Good morning, Carolyn. Thank you for having me on the show. The truth is, when you're online, on social media, on election day, it's like trying to drink water from a fire hydrant. There are so many feelings, so much uncertainty, so much speculation about what is going on that it's actually very hard to get a true sense, a signal in the noise on a day like today. So that's something that it's hard to tell exactly. We're trying to sift through all of the rumors that are happening to get a sense of what's going on.
Danielle, we've reported on this program in recent days about how, for example, US cybersecurity officials are trying to reestablish some trust with the voting base. Have you any sort of data research study that tells us how in this election, literally today in 2024, misinformation and voter distrust will be a factor relative to elections in the past?
Absolutely. So something that we have to understand that is unique about this election in general is that so much of the American public is primed to mistrust election results on the Republican right. So we think of it as kind of like the 3 C's right now. There are people out there who have convinced the American public that this election won't be safe, although it overwhelmingly by officials, it is safe. They encourage folks to go out and collect evidence that there's something wrong happening on election day. And of course, with 130,000 different polling sites in America, there are bound to be irregularities or glitches or altercations, but these have remedies. And then finally, people will go out and try to contest the election results or processes or procedures legally or politically after this. So yes, it is true there is increased mistrust, particularly among or almost predominantly among Republicans. Democrats tend to trust elections. Okay. And we're going to see some of that play out online.
In 2020, I was in Arizona, and election integrity or the integrity of voting systems was the issue then. What is the issue now, today, November 5th, 2024?
We've seen a couple themes emerge during early voting and during today. Some of those were around alleged fraudulent voter registration forms. Some of them are alleged glitches in machines that are being one small problem being extrapolated into a larger conspiracy theory. So those are some issues that we've seen and that we will continue to see. But it's important to remember that these issues tend to have remedies, and that's a good thing.
Talking of remedies, you're looking and researching into misinformation and then trying to convert it into policy. Is there future policy that can help tackle this going forward?
It's a good question. Today, we mostly focus on gathering different types of data sets of how rumors spread on platforms that is going to inform policy change, whether that is internal to tech organizations or to government organizations or also to all the different election officials and boards of elections around the country who want to gain the trust and keep the trust of the American public. So that's what we're focused on today is getting that data to help those solutions later.
Danielle Lee Thompson of the University of Washington, thank you very much. Now, coming up here on the program, why election interference fears could linger. We speak with a former chief of staff of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Kirsten Todd. That's next. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Voters heading out to the polls, top of mind is security and alleviating fears of election interference for what could be a hotly contested outcome. Joining us to discuss is Kirsten Todd, former Chief of Staff of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also now President of Creative Agency Wandros. And look, we rely and go to your CISA and cyber readiness expertise here because we understand the misinformation concerns. We were just talking about them with our previous guest. Give us the facts that this is resilient, that we are safe.
We are safe. So while elections themselves are political, election security is not. Election security is national security, and our election officials, our election infrastructure stakeholders have never been more prepared to administer a safe, secure, and resilient election. What's important to note is that after the 2016 election, elections themselves became critical infrastructure, which means that we determined as a federal government with industry that elections are critical to how we function as a society. Therefore, additional resources have been allocated to all of the state and local officials that are have actively prepared for and are now administering these elections.
Can you give us exact details of, resource is one thing, but actual practices, ways in which we know and can trust in the systems that exist?
So first of all, we have to look historically. So since the beginning of 2023, the federal government has worked closely with state and local officials to conduct physical assessments of election systems, importantly to run almost 200 exercises that prepare these individuals and these communities in these regions for different scenarios that may come into play. It's also important to note that elections are not connected to the internet, therefore giving it a different level of resilience. And what's also very critical is that 97% of registered voters are in jurisdictions with paper records, meaning we have this backup and this resilience for audits, et cetera.
Kirsten, last night, U.S. intelligence agencies issued a joint statement that in our reporting we say is unprecedented, warning that adversaries, Russia being at the forefront of it, have stepped up efforts to disrupt this election. Calling on your experience and your time in relevant agencies, why is that significant?
Well, what we know is that our foreign adversaries are absolutely conducting malign influence operations that have two real goals. The first is to undermine the confidence of Americans in our democracy. And the second is to sow discord, to just pit Americans against one another when there's actually nothing there. But what is critical about this election is we're seeing the federal government work across agencies to put out these joint announcements and to get this information out as quickly as possible. This is a big difference from where we were in 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022. It's improved each year. So actually the more that we hear about this, the better, because there is information that we are being able to communicate to voters to say, be aware of this, so that we're creating a more educated electorate.
Through cybersecurity, what are the biggest vulnerabilities that a voter today, of all days, might face throughout the day? Where is this manifesting itself for everyday people?
I worry less about cybersecurity. I worry more about just people's confidence in the system. There's never been a more important time for individuals, for citizens to believe in the resilience of this nation, to believe in our ability to conduct safe, secure elections, and to be personally resilient. And each voter has accountability and responsibility in this moment to get the right information. State and local election officials are the trusted sources for information. If a voter has any doubt about anything, to go, typically they're on websites, vote.gov can direct you where to go, but it's really important that individuals and voters find this information to be secure.
Kirsten, bear with us. Former President Donald Trump is speaking in Palm Beach, Florida, where he's cast his vote.
In force. So we'll see how it turns out, but it seems that they have really shown up in force. I just got a call from Dan Patrick in Texas. He said they've never seen anything like it. It's been great.
Was there, looking back, is there anything you would do differently about your campaign? Anything you regret about entering this campaign?
Look, regrets. You always have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the three. We did great in the first one. We did much better in the second one, but something happened. And this was the best. I would say this was the best campaign we ran.
President Trump, do you accept the possibility that you and Vice President Harris both might not get to 270 electoral votes by the end of tonight?
It should never happen. A thing like that should never happen. This election should be over. They spend all this money on machines. And frankly, if they'd use paper ballots, it would be over by 10 o'clock. And by the way, the paper ballots would cost 8%. It would be 8% of the cost. If they would use paper ballots, voter ID, proof of citizenship and one-day voting, it would all be over by 10 o'clock in the evening. It's crazy. They use these very expensive computers, and I'm hearing in Pennsylvania they won't have an answer till 2 or 3 days from now. I think it's an absolute outrage if that's the case. Now, maybe it'll be later, but it's paper ballots in France. They went paper ballots because the mail-in was not working. It was corrupt. And in France, they went paper ballots. And at 10 o'clock in the evening, they had 37 million votes counted and done. They had a winner, they had a loser. And in this country, I mean, I'm just hearing that in certain states, it's going to be a long time, and it won't even be close. It won't even be that close. They say, I'm going to win the state, but it's going to take a long time to certify it.
Could you see a world where you don't declare victory tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing the same things that you're hearing. I'm hearing states where I'm up by a lot, but they won't have a final number for a long time.
What are your plans for the night in terms of watching the results and so forth?
So we're going to have a very special group of people, many of whom you know, and they'll be at Mar-a-Lago. In addition, we'll have 4,000 or 5,000 people at the convention center. On the assumption I win, I mean, I don't know if something else happens. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of declaring victory, but if in normal times I would go over to the convention center, let's say at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or something, but I just don't know. It looks like we have a very substantial lead. It looks like we have many more Republicans voting today than Democrats. So if you have a lead and we have a bigger vote, that means you're doing very well, but they have to call a winner. They should. And they should call a winner, yes. Just stop talking about that. Go ahead. Oh, I don't know. I was honored to get Joe Rogan last night. I mean, Joe Rogan's a big deal. He's a very respected person. And I must tell you, Megyn was fantastic. She got up and said some things that were really pretty amazing. But before that, I just think we ran a good campaign. I had good policy. We want people to come into our country, but they have to come in legally. You know, we want strong borders, and we want people to come in. We want to be totally inclusive, but they have to come in. I think that was a big issue. To me, that was the biggest issue. I may be wrong. You know, a lot of people said inflation. Inflation's a disaster, but I think it's a second issue. I think the first is the border. We can't allow criminals to be put back into our country or to be put into our country. So you have 13,000 plus murderers allowed to roam in our country. Not going to be allowed. They have to go. You have drug dealers. You have terrorists. You have a tremendous amount of people that should not be in our country, and we need strong borders in this country. And I think people are voting. And I think it's personally, I think it's the number one issue. We'll see how it pans out, but I think it's the number one issue. I don't have to tell them that. I don't have to tell them that there'll be no violence. Of course there'll be no violence. My supporters are not violent people. I don't have to tell them that. And I certainly don't want any violence, but I certainly don't have to tell. These are great people. These are people that believe in no violence. Unlike your question, you believe in violence. Go ahead.
Where will you be looking early to see if you're having a good night or not? What's your goal?
Well, I think I'll be at Mar-a-Lago for the most part. We have a lot of political professionals. I'm going over now with Melania, who I'm very proud of. She's got the #1 bestseller. Can you believe that? He can believe it. But so we're very proud of the job she's done with that. Her book is #1. But we're going to go over to the office in West Palm, and we're going to say hello to the workers. They've worked very hard.
Will Georgia kind of be your first indication of whether it's going to be a good
I think so. I mean, I hear we're doing very well there in Georgia. I hear we're doing very well. I hear we're doing very well everywhere. Now, I may regret that statement, but I'm hearing that we're doing very well everywhere. Would you go louder? No, I haven't prepared a speech. No, I did speeches last night, all day long, all night long. At 2 o'clock in the morning, we left, and we did a lot of speeches. You can probably tell. No, I don't have to do that. I'm not a Democrat. I'm able to make a speech on pretty quick notice. If I win, I know what I'm going to say, and I don't even want to think about the losing part. I would like to tell all of the people that are online to stay online. We have tremendous Republican lines, and I've been asked actually to say it. It takes a while. I'd like to just make the statement that I'd like the Republicans to stay online. Democrats, if they'd like, they can leave. But I'd like the Republicans to stay online.
So additional pressure today, given the criminal cases against you that would proceed if you lost or go away?
I have no pressure whatsoever. I'm winning big cases. Those cases are all being won. The biggest case was the Florida case, and it's been won. I appreciate your nice question.
Sir, you and Mrs. Trump have been doing
No
this
pressure whatsoever.
for 9 years. Regardless of what happens tonight, is this your last campaign? Are you done after this?
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so.
How do you feel about it?
Sad and very fulfilled. I think we're going to have a very big victory today.
Mrs. How are you feeling?
Very good, thank you. Thank you.
If you win, do you have a plan in place to start making staff and
We're already a transition team, but I don't like talking about that until I find out how we do. I mean,
Sort of events from Iran and sort of assassination attempts sort of shape your thinking and stuff, right?
well, it doesn't. Look, we're not looking to do damage to Iran, but they can't have a nuclear weapon. So, my terms are very easy. They can't have a nuclear weapon. I'd like them to be a very successful country, but they just can't have a nuclear weapon.
Does it change the way you live from all the threats?
Well, I think Secret Service has been a little bit tougher, to put it mildly. I see more machine guns than I've ever seen in my life. We're surrounded by, I feel very confident with Secret Service. I think they've stepped up. Look, for a long time, they didn't give us the help. They didn't give us the assets, as they say, the manpower, woman power. They didn't give it to us. And we'd have rallies. You saw the rallies, 50, 60,000 people. And I'd have less people than Joe Biden, who had 5 people show up. And I'd have 55,000 people show up, and I had fewer people than him. So they should have done a much better job. And frankly, the president should make a very strong statement to the outside world, because
How are you feeling about your team as we head into the last day?
I think my team is incredible. Look, they say it's the best run campaign they've seen. Some people said it's the best run campaign they've ever seen. But in order to make that stick, you have to win.
How do you feel compared to your past campaigns? Are you more confident now than you were about your team than you were in the last 2 races?
My team, I'm very confident in. Many of them are the same players. As you know, Susie, a lot of the people are the same players. They've been very good.
Mr. President, Oprah said at Harris's rally last night, quote, if we don't show up tomorrow, it is entirely possible we won't be able to count the ballot again.
Well, I think it's ridiculous. Oprah, I was on her last show, or one of her last shows, and they picked the biggest people and all of that, and made a big deal. And I'm disappointed. I think Oprah's become a major divider in our country. And I think, frankly, she should be ashamed of herself. And you know who else should be ashamed? Fox. Because I've seen Oprah on Fox about 50 times making the same statement. And I think it's a disgrace what Fox does, because everyone thinks Fox is so pro-Trump. They're not pro-Trump at all. They've put Oprah on all morning long. That's all I see is Oprah. And, I knew Oprah very well. She's been in Mar-a-Lago many times. Roger King had his funeral. That's the head of King World, which was Oprah's mentor. And Oprah chose the location. She said, Mar-a-Lago is the most beautiful place. Would it be possible to have Roger's funeral at Mar-a-Lago in the ballroom? We did it. The only time I've ever had a funeral there. And I think Oprah should be ashamed of herself to say that. She should be ashamed. She knows me. She wanted to run with me as the vice president. She was going to be the vice president. She wrote me a letter. It's in the book. And now she goes and makes statements like that. She's a divider. And Barack Hussein Obama is a divider, too.
There are people who are concerned that you didn't concede the election in 2020 when you lost. They're concerned that if you lost this election, you wouldn't concede again. What do you say to those people?
I think they're crazy. If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think so far I think it's been fair. I think there's been a lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up thousands of lawyers are involved, thousands, can you imagine? And part of that is because we have too complicated a process. If we had a piece of paper, watermarked, you know that paper is more sophisticated now than computers. It's watermarked paper. It's unbelievable what happens with it. There's nothing you can do to cheat. And it costs you practically nothing to run. Think of it. We spend hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on these campaigns. You could do it for 8% of the cost and have accuracy, and we wouldn't have to be worried about when is Pennsylvania going to announce. It's really a shame.
Last question.
Last week, Howard said that RFK would not be engaging with the secretary. Does he speak for you?
Well, he knows exactly what, but that's only based on what RFK told. I don't think RFK wanted that. You're talking about Health and Human Services. Let me tell you, he's a great guy, RFK, and he's going to do pretty much what he wants as far as I'm concerned. He wants health for women, for men, for children, and I happen to agree with a lot of the things he says. The one thing I told him, and I've told you in speeches for the last 2 weeks, we got to keep him away from the liquid gold, because the liquid gold, we have more than any of it. It's called oil and gas. That one I'm going to handle.
But in your cabinet,
Well, I'd be honored to have him. Now, I haven't spoken to Howard about that, but look, if you think of it, he came in third, in running for president, right? He ran a very good race. He had obstacles. The Democrats just really unfairly put obstacles up, and hence Kennedy left the Democrat Party for the Republicans. Now, he's a very smart guy. He's a very caring guy. He's very popular, too. We get up and introduce him. The place goes wild. No, we love having him. And you know who else we love having? Elon. He's been great. And everybody, getting Joe Rogan last night and Megyn Kelly. This is very inclusive. This is a movement. This is the greatest political movement in the history of our country. And even you people, and some of you are fair sometimes, but it's the greatest movement in the history of our country, and I've made that statement 1,000 times. It's never been challenged. It is the greatest movement, and we're going to make America great again. Thank you.
Recap on the podcast. You know where to find it online on those platforms and on the Bloomberg ones as well. Thank you, team in New York. Thank you, team here in San Francisco. Get some rest, because there's a lot more to come. This is Bloomberg Technology.